25,000 men. I didn't think you wanted this all 25,000. They're not in here. So we go from the field officers to the civilian government. In 1775, the Second Congress met in Charleston. They came up with a new Council of Safety. These are your founding fathers. Drayton was elected president. They created a regiment of artillery, and then they renamed two districts, lower and upper, became the Spartan district. February, they created 2 more regiments. They elected 5 new delegates to go to the Continental Congress up in Philadelphia. You're going to start seeing some names that start becoming repetitive. What you'll find is that very few men served only once or in one capacity. Quite a few men served multiple capacities. And one of the most noted is John Rutledge. Rutledge had been in the Colonial Assembly. He was also in the legislature. He was the first governor, which they call president. You'll find that out later. He served in, he helped write the first state constitution. And then he later got voted as governor again. At the end of the war, he went to Philadelphia, and he was the chairman of the committee that wrote the U.S. Constitution. And he was also one of the signers of the Constitution. And then afterwards, he was a justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. He came back to South Carolina as Superior Court judge, and then he was elected the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. So Rutledge was a little more than just the average guy, and he should be more prominent than he is in this day of my capacity. Okay, so we get to Reverend Oliver Hart exulted that South Carolina broke off the British yoke and established a new form of government upon a free and generous plan. Our rulers being chosen from among ourselves, may we never again be enslaved. Huzzah. There we go with a few new election districts. This now becomes the upper, but everybody shortened it to the Spartan district. And then this lower district was created. Everything else stayed the same. We've got new representatives elected to the Second Provincial Congress. We know who the president of the Congress was, and we know who sat on the previous one. So you don't have to memorize these names. You get them in your CDs. So you can give this to your kids and your grandkids, and they can write their things, their hair papers on this. That's the whole point. All right, new sub-military in February of '76. Now there's 6 regiments, a couple of special units, and then there were these hybrids of county regiments of militia, district regiments of militia, and election district regiments of militia. Wow, what a concept. They all had field officers. Take a break. We're going to talk Continental Congress. There were 2 Continental Congresses. South Carolina elected a bunch of representatives to go up there. This guy served as president from October 22nd to 26th, 4 days in 1774, because it was winding down and the other guy decided he would go home early. All these folks were elected, and here's when they served, here's when they died, here's where the Congresses convened, here's the dates, or years, here's the dates. And then you get to the end of 1781, March of 1781, Continental Congress just bans because they have Articles of Confederation. And the next group becomes the Confederated Congress. But there's Milton, who served, and of course Henry Lawrence was president for, what's that, a year and a half, almost 2 years. One of our founding fathers ran the country for a year and a half. Pretty dang good. And we Charles and John Allison talked about John Mark yesterday, and they mentioned his father. But this is the father that they mentioned. He was a very powerful man. Confederated Congress met slightly different. I know this is out of order of the years. We're going to go back to it. You'll see when each one of them were elected. But there's the name, there's when they served, and and these were all considered founding fathers. On March 1789, the first U.S. Congress convened. So from then on, we set House of Representatives and U.S. Senators based on population. Okay, the note here about Lawton Smith, a lot of folks said that he didn't deserve to be elected and should not represent. He fought back, he won, he got seated, so end of story. South Carolina Constitution was ratified March 1776. It was the second of the original 13 states. Not a damn person in the low country or the back country got to vote on it. It was crammed down their throat. And it was a piece of junk. But it got us started. And it was awesome in the fact that it got us started. There were 34 articles, and it basically said all power is vested in the people by way of the state legislature, House of Representatives. And oh, by the way, we're not going to establish a Senate, we're going to establish a legislative council. We'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so there's what it looked like. Big legislative branch above everybody else. The House of Representatives per election district, it's the lower house. The legislative council were selected out of here. The dumbness of this was, if they got elected, these guys had to be backfilled. So we were constantly having elections. The executive branch was a president and a vice president with a secretary of the colony. Privy Council, vice president plus 6. They did not have to be elected from the legislature, but if they were, they had to be backfilled. And it's like, that's elect. And the country got to see, people got sick of it. Delegates to Congress, elected by the General Assembly. Okay, the field officers, elected by the General Assembly. Justices of the peace, nominated, but commissioned by the President. They're not in here because I couldn't dig out of my judicial branches selected by the General Assembly. What's wrong with this picture? Too much power to the General Assembly. What the heck? So he was the first governor. No, he was called president. He was the first president, and this dude was awesome, as I mentioned before. There's a big bio on him, a lot more online. Here are your 4 signers of the Declaration of Independence with complete bios online. So now the second Congress adjourned, and on the same day, the first General Assembly convened. Charleston. They ratified the new Constitution, and South Carolina was now a state. All provincial troops were now state troops. Henry Drayton was elected chairman of the General Assembly, and they created a Speaker of the House of Representatives and a Speaker of the Legislative Council who had to be backfilled, and then they created a bunch of sheriffs. Founding fathers. This guy decided that he was one the Commissioner of the Treasury, so he elected 2 more. They finally decided to nail down where elections were to be held. Of course, we know that on June 28th, first siege of Charleston, the Battle of Sullivan's Island, Fort Moultrie breach inlet happened. Debacle, it was terrible for the damn British. They lost, and they left us alone for 3 more years. Of course, later that fall, we had the Cherokee expedition. We had some uprisings with loyalists, but it was pretty quiet in South Carolina for about 3 years. You're not going to find me talk a lot about the 400 engagements that went on in South Carolina. I did that in another presentation, and he will find it on. But the point is what all else they went through. Okay, not only, All right. Continental Congress demanded to put 6 regiments on the Continental line. South Carolina agreed, but they said they don't ever have to leave the state. Damn it. You got to pay for them, but they got to protect us. North Carolina created 10 regiments and sent them up north. South Carolina created 6. And when they went to Savannah in 1779, they had to get legislative approval to leave the state. What a brilliant decision. Okay, Moultrie and Gadsden were commissioned brigadier generals. This was an overlook that got fixed. They decided when elections would be a new acquisition. Some of this is mid-noise. No changes here, except to note out that the Little River District had been created, but they didn't send anybody. I'm still on track, George. I'm still on track. I was told I had till 12:30. If you want me to stop now, I'm going to stop. All right. First General Assembly. These are elected based on the state constitution. You see the population growth, the elections based on population. They were granted 20, 5, 10, etc. The Legislative Council, there they are. They had to be backfilled. And then they created Speaker of the House, Speaker of the Legislative Council. By now, they have a few more changes to the military, and here are the officials elected by the first Rutledge, Secretary of the Colony, the Privy Council, the delegates to the Continental Congress. Rutledge was on it. He had to resign so he could become the vice president. They created a judicial branch, and boy, it gets hard to dig out these names, so I quit. That evening, boy, the rest of them were hard. Just for giggles, there's all the legislative acts created by the First General Assembly. Only 19 of them. And you see that their priority was money to pay for the government. Number one in North Carolina was establishing a militia. Okay. Let's see. The journals of the second are lost. Vice presidents and Thomas B. No change here. The journal being lost. These are best guess, but you see, wait a minute. There's too many, so some of these are somewhere else. There's too many here, some of these are somewhere. But that was the best guess. The Legislative Council was set up, and here's what they accomplished. They ratified a total of 82 acts.